My name's Leah. For a long time, I believed family meant safety. Support, a place you could always return to. That illusion shattered on my 30th birthday. Instead of a cake or a quiet dinner, my parents handed me a packed suitcase and a bitter ultimatum. You're too old to freeload. For years, I had carried their burdens without complaint. I covered the bills when my father Henry lost his job. I made sure the power stayed on when my mother Martha racked up credit card debt. I even paid off the second mortgage they took out to fund their dream renovation. A dream that never seemed to include me. Yet on the night I expected at least a whispered happy birthday, I got a shove out the door. I remember the cold air biting my skin as I walked to my car, my breath fogging up like the ghosts of unsaid words. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it, gripping the worn leather steering wheel until my knuckles ached. I could barely see through the windshield, my vision blurred by a mix of tears and streetlight glare. It felt surreal, like a bad movie scene. I ended up at a 24-hour diner, the kind with sticky red booths and faded jukeboxes that only play half the songs. I dropped into a corner booth, staring at the cracked Formica tabletop as the waitress slid a mug of burnt coffee in front of me. It tasted like ash, but I sipped it anyway, the heat grounding me as my mind raced. How had it come to this? I wasn't a freeloader, I was their only child, the one who had sacrificed countless Friday nights and vacations to keep their fragile world from collapsing. I had been the one to bail them out of financial messes, to play peacekeeper when their shouting matches echoed through the house to patch up the cracks they pretended weren't there. Yet, tonight they discarded me like a broken lamp. I pulled my phone from my pocket, half expecting a missed call, a text, some sign they regretted their decision. Nothing. Just a handful of notifications from social media where distant friends posted pictures of their cozy birthday dinners and weekend getaways. I set the phone down and leaned back, letting the low hum of fluorescent lights fill the silence. I felt small, absurdly so, like a kid who got left behind at the fair. The doorbell chimed as another late-night straggler wandered in, their boots clomping against the cracked tile. I looked up, catching my reflection in the darkened window. A tired woman with tangled hair and hollow eyes clutching a chipped coffee cup like a lifeline. This was my life now. Unwanted, unneeded, unmoored. I sat there for a long time, the coffee cooling in my hands, as the world outside the glass shifted from deep night to the pale gray of early morning. The waitress refilled my cup twice without asking, her tired eyes flicking over me like she had seen this scene 100 times before, a ghost of a person running on caffeine and shattered dreams. Eventually, I dragged myself out to my car, the cold morning air seeping into my bones as I slid behind the wheel. I drove without direction, past closed shops and darkened houses, through streets where I had once learned to ride my bike, where my parents had cheered from the sidelines at school parades and sports games. Ghosts of happier times that felt like someone else's memories now. It wasn't until I found myself parked in front of my apartment building, a shoebox-sized one-bedroom I had held onto for years just in case, that I realized what I had to do. I stepped out, the crunch of gravel under my boots echoing in the pre-dawn silence. I fumbled with my keys, the cold biting at my fingers as I unlocked the door and stumbled inside. The air was stale dust motes swirling in the thin strip of light from the hallway. I collapsed onto the worn couch, the springs creaking in protest, and let my head fall back against the wall. My mind felt like a tangled knot, anger and hurt twisting together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. But as I sat there staring at the cracked ceiling, a strange calm washed over me. They wanted me gone. Fine, they wanted me to stand on my own. Perfect. I had been their crutch for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to walk without bearing someone else's weight. I reached for my phone again, my thumb hovering over the call log. I could confront them, demand an explanation, or beg for some semblance of closure. But then I remembered the way my father's voice had cut through the kitchen that night, sharp and final, leaving no room for negotiation. Instead, I opened my banking app. I still had control over the joint account my mother had insisted I keep for emergencies. I scrolled through the transactions, watching my hard-earned paychecks drain away for utility bills, insurance, and groceries. Everything they needed to keep their lives running smoothly while they cut me loose. My jaw tightened, fingers trembling slightly as I hit the transfer button, moving every cent into my personal account. I hesitated for a moment, my finger hovering over the confirm button. This was it. The first real step toward cutting myself free. I tapped the screen, my heart lurching as the confirmation popped up. The joint account sat empty, now a hollow shell of misplaced trust and unspoken expectations. Leaning back, I let the phone drop onto the couch beside me. My pulse thudded in my ears, a slow, steady drumbeat that felt more alive than I had in years. I had been their safety net for too long, the silent foundation of their lives, but no more. I sat there, the shadows shifting around me as the sun finally crept over the horizon, cutting through the blinds in sharp, accusing stripes. I wasn't just walking away from them. I was taking back everything they had drained from me, piece by bitter piece. Tomorrow I would start fresh, but tonight I would rest. I had finally reclaimed something they had stolen from me a long time ago myself. The next morning I woke up to a dull ache in my neck from sleeping on the couch, my body protesting every movement. I glanced around the tiny apartment, the thin morning light creeping through dusty blinds casting long slanted shadows across the peeling linoleum. This place had always been a backup, a safety net I never thought I'd actually need. Now it felt like my only lifeline. I dragged myself to the kitchen, pouring a glass of tap water that tasted faintly metallic. The silence in the room felt strange, almost too quiet, as if the walls themselves held their breath waiting for me to decide what came next. I leaned against the counter, the cool edge pressing into my spine, and took a slow, steadying breath. All right, Leah, time to get it together. My phone buzzed on the counter, startling me. I grabbed it, half expecting a flood of apology texts, maybe even a missed call from my parents, but the screen only showed a few automated bank notifications confirming the transfer I'd made. In the haze of last night's anger, the joint account was drained. The bridge burned. No going back now. I pulled up my email, scrolling through the mess of digital junk until I found the one from the utility company. My name, my account, my responsibility. Not anymore. I hit the cancel button, fingers trembling just a bit as the confirmation screen loaded. Electricity canceled, water canceled, internet canceled. It felt like severing the last fraying threads that had tied me to them. I could almost picture my mother's face when the lights flickered out, mid-reality show, her perfectly manicured fingers stabbing at the remote as if she could bully the power back on. And my father, his grumbled curses filling the air as the house grew colder, darker, more honest. For once, they'd feel what it meant to live without me propping up their crumbling little kingdom. I tossed the phone onto the counter, the clatter echoing off the empty walls, and leaned against the cool metal of the fridge. I hadn't felt this light in years, the crushing weight of obligation finally slipping from my shoulders. I hadn't realized how deeply they had sunk their hooks into me until I started pulling them out. As the morning stretched into afternoon, I found myself pacing the small living room, the thin carpet worn to threads in places, my mind running in tight, anxious circles. I should be doing something, anything but. For the first time in forever, I had no one else to worry about, no crises to manage. It was just me and the steady tick of the old wall clock, marking each second of this strange new freedom. I wandered over to the window, peering down at the street below. A mother jogged by her toddler, stumbling along behind her, little legs pumping furiously to keep up. An older couple shuffled hand in hand, their heads bent close as they murmured to each other. I felt a pang of something, jealousy maybe? Or just a hollow echo of the life I'd once imagined for myself. My phone buzzed again, and I snatched it up, expecting another pointless spam message. Instead, it was a text from my cousin Rachel. "Hey, just heard about the fallout. You okay?" I blinked at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Did she know how much had my parents already spread? I imagined the phone calls, the whispered complaints about their ungrateful daughter, the crocodile tears over how I'd just up and abandoned them. The thought made my jaw clench, a fresh wave of anger prickling under my skin. I typed back, my thumbs moving faster than my brain. I'm fine. Just making some changes. Needed to get out of that house. I hit send before I could second guess it, my heart racing in the quiet aftermath. Rachel was one of the few family members I actually liked. Someone who had always been more like a sister than a distant relative. But even she didn't know the full extent of what I'd gone through the years. I'd spent propping up my parents' crumbling lives, the sacrifices they had casually swept aside. The phone buzzed again, her reply popping up almost immediately. "Good for you. They never appreciated you anyway. You deserve better." I stared at the message, my chest tightening. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was my chance to finally break free, to stop being the dutiful daughter who always put everyone else first. I set the phone down, my reflection catching in the dusty glass of the microwave door. Tired eyes, tangled hair, a faint line of worry etched between my brows. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. I straightened, squaring my shoulders as if shaking off a physical weight I had spent years letting them drain me emotionally and financially, until there was almost nothing left. But now I had a chance to rebuild, to reclaim the life they had stolen piece by piece. I crossed the room to my laptop, flipping it open and tapping the power button. The screen flickered to life, the harsh blue glow casting sharp shadows across the cluttered countertop. I pulled up my budget spreadsheet, the one I'd hidden behind a nondescript folder labeled Work Documents to avoid my mother's prying eyes. I scrolled through the numbers, the tight columns, and neatly arranged expenses. A comforting kind of chaos. I'd kept meticulous records of every bill I'd paid, every loan I'd covered, every emergency expense I had quietly absorbed. I wasn't just cutting them off financially, I was reclaiming my story, every dollar a line in the narrative of my escape. I hit print. The ancient machine beside my desk sputtering to life, churning out page after page of proof receipts, invoices, bank statements. The physical weight of it in my hands felt solid, real, like the backbone I had spent so many years bending for their convenience. I slid the stack into a manila envelope, my mind already racing ahead to the next step. They had tried to make me disposable, to erase my contributions with a wave of their entitled hands. But I wouldn't go quietly. They wanted me gone. Fine, but they would feel my absence like a missing heartbeat, a sudden jarring silence in the life they had taken for granted for so long. As I sealed the envelope and dropped it onto the kitchen table, I felt a strange simmering calm settle over me. I had spent so long living for them, worrying about their needs, their comfort, their happiness. But now, for the first time, I was living for me, and I had no intention of looking back. The next few days passed in a haze of small victories and sudden jarring silences. I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, scrubbing away years of neglected dust and faded memories. It felt like exorcising ghosts, each swipe of the sponge a quiet declaration of independence. I hit the gym, the clank of weights and the hum of treadmills drowning out the nagging doubts that crept in when the apartment grew too quiet. I filled my grocery cart with fresh vegetables, lean proteins, and the little indulgences I had always denied myself while footing my parents' endless grocery bills. Real maple syrup, a bottle of wine that didn't come from the clearance rack, the good coffee beans that actually smelled like a morning you wanted to wake up to. The apartment slowly transformed from a backup plan into a home. I bought thick velvet curtains for the drafty windows, threw a soft blanket over the creaking couch, and scattered a few framed photos around, mostly of trips I had taken alone, snapshots of my own quiet rebellions against the life I had left behind. The walls still felt too bare, the corners too sharp, but it was mine, and for now, that was enough. Then came the first call. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the screen flashing with a number I knew all too well. I hesitated, the air around me thick with a sudden pressing heat. I let it ring twice before swiping my thumb across the screen. Leah. My mother's voice, tight and sharp as ever, cut through the line. She didn't bother with a hello. How are you, or even a trace of the maternal warmth she used to fake when I was younger. Just my name delivered like a slap. I leaned against the counter, curling my fingers around the edge, letting the cool laminate press into my palm. Yes, there was a pause, the faint crackle of the line carrying the tension between us. I could almost see her standing in the kitchen, one hand on her hip, eyes narrowed as if she could somehow intimidate me from miles away. "You need to come back," she said finally. The words clipped and forced like they'd been dragged out of her by some unseen hand. "Your father? He's not well? He's been having chest pains and the house is a mess without you." A bitter laugh bubbled up from my chest, catching in my throat before I could swallow it down. Of course. Of course it came back to the house, to their comfort, to the cracks I had been spackling over for years without thanks. "I'm not coming back, Mom," I said, my voice steady, my pulse a slow measured beat in my ears. "You made it pretty clear how you feel about me staying there. I'm too old to freeload, remember?" She spluttered, the phone line crackling as if it shared her outrage. "Don't be dramatic, Leah. Family sticks together. We're your parents. You owe us that much." I felt my jaw tighten, the words scraping against my teeth like broken glass. "I don't owe you anything," I said, each word sharp and deliberate. "I've paid my dues. More than my share. If you're struggling, maybe you should look at how you treat the people who actually care about you." Silence. A long, aching silence that stretched between us, heavy with years of unspoken resentment. I heard her inhale sharply, the sound crackling through the line before she spoke again, her voice dropping into that tight, whispered tone she used when she was truly furious. "You're being selfish, Leah. After everything we've done for you. We took care of you for years and now you just abandon us. Leave us to rot in that house. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my forehead against the cool glass of the kitchen window. Outside, a car door slammed. A dog barked. The world kept spinning, despite the storm brewing on the other end of the line. You didn't take care of me, I whispered more to myself than to her. I took care of you, and I'm done. Before she could respond, I hit the end call button, the line cutting off with a harsh click. I tossed the phone onto the counter, the impact sending a fresh wave of adrenaline through my veins. My hands shook a fine tremor that crept up my arms and settled in my chest, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I leaned back against the counter, sliding down to sit on the cold linoleum, my pulse thrumming in my ears, drowning out the quiet hum of the fridge and the distant murmur of traffic outside. For a moment, I let the fear creep in, let the guilt snake its way through my defenses, hissing in my ear about duty and family and blood ties. But then I remembered the cold, hollow feeling of that last dinner, the way my father had looked at me, his face a mask of contempt as he declared me disposable, his voice ringing in my ears even now. You're too old to freeload. I clenched my fists, my nails biting into my palms, grounding me in the present. No, I wouldn't let them drag me back into their twisted little web of obligations and guilt. I had come too far, burned too many bridges to turn back now. I forced myself to stand, my legs shaky, but my resolve solid. I crossed the kitchen, grabbed the manila envelope from the table, and marched to the door, flinging it open to let in a blast of cold autumn air. I stepped outside, the chill biting into my skin, the wind whipping my hair into my eyes, and marched down the stairs to the communal mailboxes by the curb. I slid the envelope into the outgoing slot, the metal flap clanging shut with a satisfying finality. It was done. The first real tangible step towards severing the last of the cords they had wrapped around my life. I straightened, the icy wind cutting through my thin jacket, but I didn't shiver. I felt lighter somehow, as if each step back toward my apartment carried me further from their grasp. I wouldn't be their safety net anymore. I wouldn't let them drag me back into their crumbling little kingdom of empty promises and unspoken debts. They wanted me gone. Fine, but they would feel my absence like a wound, a slow, steady ache that grew sharper with every passing day. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. The days slipped by, the chill of early winter seeping into the apartment, fogging the windows and whispering through the cracks in the old plaster walls. I had settled into a strange sort of routine. My days filled with small necessary tasks, applying for new jobs, organizing the mess of paperwork that had piled up in my rush to leave, and slowly carving out a new life for myself. Then one morning, the silence shattered. It started with a knock at the door, sharp, insistent, each rap like a hammer to my fraying nerves. I froze, my heart lurching into my throat as I glanced at the peephole, half expecting to find my mother standing on the other side, her lips already curling into a disapproving scowl. Instead, I found a man in a cheap suit, a battered leather briefcase clutched in one hand, the other raised for another round of furious knocking. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the deadbolt, every nerve in my body screaming at me to ignore it, to pretend I wasn't home. But then he cleared his throat, a loud, deliberate sound that cut through the door like a blade. Leah Thompson. His voice was deep, businesslike, the kind of tone that never brought good news. I took a deep breath, my fingers fumbling with the lock as I cracked the door open, peering out at him with a mixture of suspicion and dread. Yes, I managed, my throat suddenly dry. He gave me a tight, professional smile, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes, and held out a thick envelope. The paper slightly creased where his fingers had dug into it. "You've been served," he said, his tone as flat as the gray November sky outside. I blinked, my mind scrambling to catch up as I took the envelope from his outstretched hand, the weight of it settling into my palm like a lead brick. I watched dumbfounded as he turned on his heel and disappeared down the narrow hallway, the echo of his footsteps trailing behind him like the whisper of a coming storm. I closed the door with a shaky hand, leaning back against the cool wood as I stared down at the envelope. My name neatly typed across the front in bold black letters. I slid my finger under the flap, tearing it open with a slow, deliberate motion, my pulse thudding in my ears. Inside, a thick stack of legal papers, each page dense with the tight, unforgiving lines of a formal complaint. My breath hitched as I scanned the first few lines, the words blurring together in a sickening swirl of disbelief and fury. Theft, financial abandonment, elder neglect. The accusations hit like a series of punches to the gut, each one more absurd than the last. My parents had filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of draining their bank accounts, of abandoning them in their time of need, of essentially robbing them blind. I let the papers fall to the floor, my vision swimming as a fresh wave of anger clawed its way up my throat. They were trying to destroy me. After everything I had done, every sacrifice I had made, they were trying to paint me as the villain in their twisted little story. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the door, the cool wood digging into my spine. As I struggled to breathe, my mind racing through 1,000 tangled thoughts. I had known they would lash out, that they wouldn't just let me walk away without a fight. But this felt like a betrayal on a level I hadn't even considered possible. I forced myself to focus, my fingers curling into tight fists as I reached for the stack of papers, flipping through the pages with a growing sense of disbelief. Each line, each paragraph, a carefully constructed lie. A twisting of the truth designed to make me look like the monster, the ungrateful child who had drained her parents dry before running off into the night. I scanned the list of demands: repayment for every bill I had ever covered, compensation for emotional distress, even a request for a formal public apology. It was absurd, laughable in its audacity, and yet it sent a fresh jolt of fear racing down my spine. They were trying to corner me, to trap me in their twisted version of reality, to erase the truth of who I was and replace it with their own carefully constructed lie. I shoved the papers aside, pushing myself to my feet, my breath coming in short, ragged bursts. I crossed the small living room in 3 quick strides, grabbing my laptop from the coffee table and flipping it open, my fingers flying over the keys as I pulled up my bank records, my email history, every scrap of evidence I had meticulously saved over the years. I scrolled through the digital folders, my pulse slowing as the cold, hard facts began to stack up in my favor. I had proof: months of rent payments, utility bills, grocery receipts, every dime I had ever funneled into that crumbling house. They could twist the story all they wanted, but the numbers didn't lie. I set to work, my mind sharpening into a razor edge of focus as I pieced together my own case, each line of evidence a nail in the coffin of their carefully constructed lie. I pulled up old text messages, emails from my mother demanding yet another transfer, a desperate plea for help when the furnace had given out. In the dead of winter, I printed out bank statements highlighting each payment in angry neon strokes, the paper stacking up beside me in a growing pile of righteous fury. I wasn't just going to fight this, I was going to bury them with the truth. By the time I finally leaned back, my fingers stiff and aching, the apartment was filled with the steady hum of the old radiator, the clatter of the printer still spitting out page after page of proof. I let my head fall back against the couch, my chest rising and falling in deep, steady breaths, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. They had tried to paint me as the villain, to twist my story into something ugly and unrecognizable, but they had underestimated me. They had forgotten the lengths I would go to protect myself, to reclaim the life they had tried so hard to crush. I reached for the stack of papers beside me, the cool, smooth weight of it grounding me. In the moment, I would file my own countersuit, my own formal complaint outlining every penny I had ever spent, every sacrifice I had ever made, every piece of my soul I had poured into that house without ever asking for a single thing in return. I would fight this, and I would win. And when it was over, when the dust finally settled, they would find themselves standing in the rubble of their own lies. The truth, a bitter echo in the hollow, empty house they had tried to trap me in. I exhaled, the breath shuddering out of me like a final whispered promise. I would not be their victim. Not anymore. The first real snow of the season arrived a few days later. A thick, wet blanket that clung to the rooftops and tree branches, muffling the city's usual clatter into a quiet, icy hush. I stood at the window, my breath fogging the glass as I watched the snow drift down in lazy spirals. My mind 1,000 miles away. The stack of legal papers still sat on the edge of my coffee table. A harsh, unyielding reminder of the war my parents had declared. I had spent the past few days combing through every line, every accusation, the anger simmering in my veins, slowly crystallizing into a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a fight. Fine, they would get one. I had already met with a lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen, who specialized in family disputes and financial recoveries. She had listened to my story in grim silence, her fingers tapping a steady rhythm against her notepad as I laid out the details of my parents' betrayal. When I finished, she had leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking under her weight, and offered me a tight, approving nod. "You've got a strong case," she said, her voice crisp and confident. "The financial records alone should be enough to bury them. And if they've really been siphoning money from your joint accounts without your consent, you might even have grounds for a counterclaim." I had left her office that afternoon with a thick stack of paperwork, my hands trembling slightly as I clutched the manila folder to my chest. It felt like walking into battle, every step a calculated risk, every decision a potential turning point. But I had no intention of backing down. Not this time. I spent the next few days in a haze of preparation. My apartment slowly transforming into a war room. The small kitchen table disappeared under a mess of printouts. Bank statements, highlighted texts, and neatly arranged timelines. I made lists. Cross-referenced dates. Double-checked every figure and transaction in my mind. A relentless machine churning through the evidence, building my case piece by bitter piece. Then one morning my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, my heart lurching as my mother's name flashed across the display. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the answer button, as a fresh wave of anger flared in my chest. But curiosity, or perhaps a lingering trace of masochism, got the better of me, and I hit accept. Lifting the phone to my ear. "Leah," she said, her voice tight and strained, the words snapping like a stretched rubber band. "We need to talk." I took a deep breath, my jaw tightening as I leaned back against the kitchen counter, the cold edge pressing into my spine. "About what?" There was a pause. A slight crackling hesitation that told me everything I needed to know. She hadn't expected me to be this calm, this collected, and the realization had thrown her off balance. I felt a grim, vicious satisfaction bloom in my chest. "Your father isn't doing well," she said finally. Her tone slipping into that familiar wheedling pitch she used whenever she wanted something. "His health is declining. He's under a lot of stress, Leah. This lawsuit, this whole situation, it's making things worse." I closed my eyes. My pulse a slow, steady beat in my ears. I had expected this, of course. The guilt trip, the emotional manipulation, the desperate attempts to claw me back into their orbit. It was as predictable as the changing seasons, as inevitable as the snow piling up outside my window. "I'm not dropping the case," I said, my voice low and measured, each word a carefully placed stone. "You made your choice when you tried to ruin my life. Now you have to live with it." Another pause, longer. This time, the line crackling with the weight of her unspoken anger. I could almost see her pacing the kitchen, her nails tapping against the countertop as she scrambled to regain control of the conversation. "Leah," she said, her voice dropping into a sharp, clipped tone that sent a shiver down my spine. "We're still your parents. We raised you, provided for you, gave you everything you needed. And this is how you repay us, by dragging us through the mud, humiliating us in front of the entire family." I felt a cold, bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, the sound harsh and sharp as it slipped past my lips. "You're joking, right? Everything I needed. You mean like emotional support? Financial stability? Basic human decency? Because if that's what you think you gave me, then we're living in completely different realities." Silence. I could almost hear her seething on the other end, her carefully constructed facade cracking under the weight of my defiance. It felt good in a dark, twisted way to finally stand up to her, to rip off the mask I had worn for so many years. The dutiful daughter, the compliant doormat. "You're being dramatic," she snapped, her voice rising in pitch, her control slipping with every word. "This is all just a misunderstanding. You're blowing things out of proportion as usual. If you would just come home, we could work this out like a family." I felt my teeth grind together, the words scraping against my tongue like shards of glass. "There is no family, Mom. Not anymore. You made sure of that the moment you decided I was disposable, the second you tried to rewrite our history to paint me as the villain. You don't get to call the shots anymore." I hit the end call button before she could respond, the sudden silence ringing in my ears like a gunshot. I tossed the phone onto the table, my hands shaking, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I leaned back against the counter, my chest heaving, each breath a sharp, ragged pull against my tightening lungs. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the stack of papers on the table, the neatly organized chaos of my new life, the slow, steady unraveling of everything I had once thought was unbreakable. I had cut the cords, severed the last fraying threads that had held me in place for so long. And yet the echoes of their betrayal still clung to me, a ghostly whisper that tainted every breath, every heartbeat. But as the snow continued to fall outside, muffling the city's heartbeat into a soft, steady thrum, I felt something else stir in my chest. Not anger, not fear, but a quiet, simmering resolve, a fierce, unyielding determination that burned like a live wire under my skin. They had pushed me to the edge, tried to destroy me with their lies and manipulation, but they had underestimated me. They had forgotten that I had already spent years surviving their cruelty, that I had learned to stand alone in the darkness they had tried to trap me in. I took a deep breath, the cold, clean air filling my lungs, and reached for the stack of papers on the table. My fingers steady, my heart hammering in my chest. It was time to finish what they had started. The letter from the courthouse arrived on a Tuesday, slipping through the mail slot with a soft metallic clink that echoed through my quiet apartment. I stared at the envelope for a long moment, the stark black print of my name, a final, unavoidable reminder of the battle I had been fighting for weeks. I picked it up, the paper cool and stiff between my fingers, and dropped into the worn armchair by the window, the leather creaking under my weight. I slid my thumb under the flap, tearing it open with a slow, deliberate motion. My pulse a steady, unrelenting drumbeat in my ears. The first line of the letter was cold and direct, each word a sharp final cut. Notice of dismissal. Thompson, Farr Thompson. I exhaled a long, shuddering breath that seemed to echo through my entire body, my fingers trembling as I scanned the rest of the letter. The lawsuit my parents had filed, the desperate, grasping attempt to ruin me, to paint me as the ungrateful daughter, the thief, the villain, had been thrown out. Dismissed without merit, without a single shred of their lies holding up under the weight of the truth. I sank back into the chair, the rough leather pressing into my spine, my chest rising and falling in deep, steady breaths as the words slowly sank in. I had won. Not just the case, but the war they had tried to drag me into, the bitter, twisted battle for control over my life, my choices, my very identity. I let the letter fall onto the small table beside me, the paper settling with a soft, rustling sigh, and leaned my head back, my eyes drifting to the window. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, the streets blanketed in a thick, pristine layer of white. The world suddenly quiet, clean, and new. I closed my eyes, letting the stillness wash over me, the echoes of my parents' accusations slowly fading into the background, their voices reduced to a distant, meaningless murmur. They had tried to break me, to erase me, to twist my story into something ugly and unrecognizable. But I had stood my ground, clung to the truth like a lifeline, and come out the other side, stronger, sharper, unbreakable. My phone buzzed on the side table, the sharp vibration rattling against the glass top and pulling me back to the present. I picked it up, my heart giving a small, startled jump as I saw Rachel's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the accept button for a brief, uncertain moment before I hit it, lifting the phone to my ear. "Leah," she said, her voice a soft, hesitant whisper, as if she wasn't quite sure what to say. "I just heard about the lawsuit. Are you okay?" I let out a short, bitter laugh, the sound catching in my throat, rough and jagged as broken glass. "Yeah," I said, my voice steady, the words coming easier than I expected. "Yeah, I'm okay. Better than okay. Actually, it's over. It's finally over." There was a pause, the line crackling with a strange electric tension before she spoke again. Her tone a mix of relief and something else, something sharper, more uncertain. I'm glad to hear that," she said, her voice tightening slightly. "But Leah, you should know Mom and Dad have been talking. They've been telling everyone that you're unstable, that you've lost your mind, that you're the one who turned your back on them." I closed my eyes, the familiar bitter taste of betrayal settling on my tongue, the ache of old wounds reopening in my chest. Of course they would try to twist the narrative, to paint themselves as the victims, to rewrite the story in their favor. Even now, even after everything. Let them. I said, my voice low, each word a slow, deliberate cut. Let them say whatever they want. I don't care anymore. They don't get to control my life, my story, my truth. Not anymore. Another pause, longer this time, the silence stretching between us like a fraying rope. Each second, another thread snapping under the weight of old, unspoken pain. "All right," Rachel said finally, her voice soft, a hint of something like pride slipping through the cracks. "All right, Leah. I just wanted you to know that I'm here if you ever need someone to talk to, if you ever need family." I felt my chest tighten, a strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through my veins, melting the last of the ice that had settled around my heart. Family. The word felt different now, lighter, less like a chain around my neck, and more like a promise, a choice. "Thanks, Rachel," I whispered, my throat suddenly tight, the words catching on the edges of old scars. "That means more than you know." We said our goodbyes, the call ending with a soft click that echoed through the quiet apartment, the silence settling around me like a warm, comforting blanket. I set the phone down beside the letter, the two pieces of my past, my present. my future resting side by side. A strange, quiet testament to the life I had fought so hard to reclaim. I stood my legs a little unsteady, my pulse a slow, steady thrum in my ears, and crossed the small living room to the window, my fingers curling around the cold metal frame as I looked out at the snow-covered street below. The world felt different, brighter. The sharp, clear winter air cutting through the last lingering shadows of my old life. I took a deep breath, my lungs filling with the crisp, clean air, and smiled a small, tentative curve of my lips. The first real, unguarded smile I had felt in what felt like a lifetime. I had won. I had reclaimed my life, my story, my truth. And as the snow continued to fall outside, muffling the city's heartbeat into a soft, steady thrum, I felt something new stir in my chest, something warm and bright and fiercely, undeniably alive. Freedom. I turned from the window, my steps light, my heart steady, and moved to the small kitchen. The cool tile pressing against my bare feet as I reached for the coffee pot, the familiar, comforting weight of the ceramic handle grounding me in the present. I poured myself a cup, the rich, dark liquid steaming in the morning light, and leaned back against the counter. My eyes drifting to the small framed photo on the wall, a picture of me standing on a windswept beach, my hair tangled in the salt-laden breeze, my smile bright and unguarded, my eyes filled with a fierce, unbreakable spark. I took a long, slow sip of the coffee, the bitter warmth settling in my chest, and let out a deep, contented sigh. The sound echoing through the quiet apartment, a soft, final punctuation mark at the end of a long, brutal chapter. I had walked away, I had survived. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt like I was finally coming home. Story 2. Hello, I'm Odilon. I can confirm that my sister humiliated me in front of everyone by standing up at our mother's will reading. She grinned as if it were her favorite pastime and referred to me as the family error, as if I were an afterthought. However, she was unaware that everything had been revised by our mother. They believed the truth had been buried. However, what if I was buried alive with the truth, awaiting receipts? Stay put, because what followed did more than simply make a room quiet. It put an end to a lie-based legacy. It's only 2 days. The notification I received a stiff white envelope that smelled like old paper and had embossed lettering when I went to my apartment in Atlanta. The reading will take place 2 days prior. No heads up, no call. Just the letter, like a challenge, sitting on my doormat. Callista promised to keep me updated. That was at the funeral 2 weeks ago. She meticulously prepared the funeral. Even the press announcement sent to the Alumni Association and the hue of the flowers. I hardly had time to bid my mother farewell in privacy. This now. With the unread letter resting on my lap, I sat on the sofa and grabbed the silk scarf from the drawer on my side table. Soft and cream in tone with fading blue embroidery. J.M. Marin. Jacqueline. Mom's initials. The final gift she offered me before things became chilly. I mumbled, I guess I'm still the last to know. I looked at the envelope one more, my name nicely written. The afterthought that I always am, like a visitor at someone else's celebration. Miss Odilon. Marin? I didn't weep at all. I simply stood. I began packing after gently folding the scarf back into the drawer. Even if my recollections of Charleston had faded long ago, the city still had the scent of sea air and magnolias. I felt as though I had been cut off from a life as I drove up to the estate. The massive, ponderous iron gates open, as if the establishment itself didn't like my presence. I was surprised by how loudly the gravel crunched beneath my tires. Perhaps it was only my nerves. As usual, I parked in the rear. The front was off limits to us. If you weren't Callista or someone, when the housekeeper opened the door, she hardly looked at me. Oh, did you come? I didn't respond. I simply nodded and entered the quiet, air-conditioned entryway. Everything had the scent of lavender soap and lemon polish, just the way Mom maintained it. Then Callisto's new helper arrived, tall, sulky, and brimming with prep school snobber. She looked at me as if I had arrived early for an uninvited gathering. I had no idea you were going. I said. She said I received an invitation. I gave a straightforward response while shielding myself with the envelope. She took a whiff. They're all dressed for the terrace garden, though. They were, of course. They appear to have been lifted from a catalog of country clubs. Aunt Dolores smiled warmly and offered me a gentle embrace. Her arms shook slightly. Odilon, I'm so happy you're here, my love. Your mother would also be. I'm hoping so, I said quietly. Callista was the only one who avoided making eye contact. As soon as I walked upon the flagstone, she turned. Her tone was sweet, and now look who arrived. I was unaware that they were allowing plus ones to attend the reading. A few courteous giggles changed the atmosphere. Close, mostly quiet, yet apprehensive. I didn't answer. Callista lived on responses as I had long since discovered. Don't give her that. You also denied her oxygen. I sat down beneath the striped canopy at the long table's edge. I was not a member of their club, not with my 30 Marshals outfit and flat heels. However, I was present. That made a difference. My gaze drifted to the blue full hydrangeas that lined the stone wall as I got comfortable as if they were flowering just to exact revenge. I take a big breath. In the back of my mind, flashback arcs hummed. At 16, Callista receives a brand new automobile. I was struggling to pay for my bus fare because she earned a vacation. She skipped college. I'm working 3 jobs to make ends meet. They hardly tolerated me as their daughter, I said to myself in a whisper. The person they always thought would keep silent. Not this time, though. I noticed Callista sitting across from me, digging for her high-end pocketbook, just as the lawyer appeared through the French doors. She took out a folded piece of paper, looked around, and slid it under the table in the direction of the man sitting next to her, Uncle Rowan. It was rehearsed, fluid, and fast. However I did see it, I realized then that this would be more than a simple scanning of names and assets. It was a ruse. As soon as Mr. Whitlow entered the sunroom via the glass doors, the entire space changed. Talks stalled. Midway through, the sound of coffee spoons clinking on porcelain plates stopped. The air itself felt odd, like if it contained something weighty and thick. I pretended that I hadn't just watched my sister sneak anything under the tablecloth while I sat motionless with my hands folded neatly in my lap. Mr. Whitlow nodded courteously and cleared his throat. I appreciate everyone's attendance. I'll try my best to be short and considerate because I understand that this is a trying moment. Like she was trying out for a soap show. Callista got up from her velvet chair. Her expression was set in serious composure. She took a position next to the lawyer and put a hand on his arm as if they were longtime companions. Hopefully this won't be one of Odilon's surprises. She laughed sharply and brightly. The ensuing quiet wasn't encouraging, it had a burden, a sort of clumsy pact that nobody would oppose her. My cheeks flushed, but I remained silent. Give her a chance. Whitlow blinked slightly as if he hadn't heard her remark before, but he continued, carefully as if waiting would make the next step easier. He opened his briefcase. We'll start by verifying our presence, he added. Please accept this as a simple acknowledgement of your attendance and comprehension of the proceedings. Odilon. He gave me a single sheet of paper with an empty signature line and a glossy blue header. I scowled, only me. Whitlow gave a nod. Indeed. From my end, it was merely formality. Aunt Dolores moved around in her chair and leaned a little closer. More to herself than to me, she muttered, They didn't ask me to sign anything last time. She spoke softly but confidently. I read the paper. Lowe's company printed it, but there was something strange about it. Only the title, some legalese, and that signature line were mentioned. No other information was included. Please send me a copy of this. Silently, I said, Callista, husband, Brant. The wallpaper for humans moved a little. I briefly believed he might say something, but he obviously didn't. With another nod, Whitlow retrieved the form and carefully placed it in his briefcase. Naturally, the carpet was streaked with pale gold as the sun filtered through the arched windows behind him. The air was sufficiently stirred by a breeze that brushed the sheer curtains for me to detect a hint of Callisto's perfume, something flowery, sharp, and costly. Her cool, playful eyes tilted her head. The daughter who paid the most attention was Odilon. You weren't? Nobody answered. She continued, particularly after her mother became ill. Her frequent visits and late-night calls caused Mom to feel very bad. You know, like it wasn't enough. Her tone was light, but the weight of her words landed like a slap. She didn't say it outright, but she painted me as a manipulator in one breathless sentence. I didn't look at her. Instead, I reached for the scarf in my bag. That old silk square with my mother's initials stitched in a faded thread. I held it tightly in my palm. A flash of memory. Mom in hospice, thin as paper. Her hand trembling as she pressed the scarf to her chest. Her voice barely above a whisper. Don't let them take everything I had. nodded through tears, not fully understanding what she meant, now sitting in this room dressed up like a southern brunch. I understood perfectly. This wasn't just about inheritance. This was about erasure. Mr. Whitlow cleared his throat again. If we're all situated, I'll begin reading. The last will and testament of Maribel Wainwright. He gazed around the room, then halted, his eyes falling directly on me. You may want to sit down for this. The sunroom had grown motionless but not quiet, the type of silence that hummed in your ears. I scarcely heard my own breath as Mr. Whitlow adjusted his spectacles, cleared his throat, and unfolded the document in front of him with meticulous slowness. He started reading the will in a tone that attempted but failed to seem routine, following the last officially attested and notarized testament. He added the totality of the Marin estate comprising the property. Monetary assets, personal possessions, and residual income is being handed to Audalon. Marin. A glass smashed behind me? I didn't even look to see who dropped it. All I heard next was a hiss. Someone mumbling. You've got to be kidding, Callista. His hand, which had been lying comfortably on the table, surged upward, knocking over her nicely positioned water glass. Her polished expression vanished. What? She took a breath. Mr. Whitlow remained unflinching. That's what the paper says. Dolores's lips moved slightly, but she remained silent. I sat still. I wasn't even positive that I heard my name being written. Everything. The pause followed, but Mr. Whitlow remarked, his voice tensing. A clause is present. There was, of course. He continued, holding out another piece of paper. Miss Marin must live in the family home, manage the estate, and keep it operational for at least a year in order to receive the inheritance. No property rights may be sold, redeveloped, or transferred during this time. He gave Callista a quick glance before turning back to face me. Additionally, at this time, Miss Callista Marine is prohibited from starting or assisting with any structural modifications, financial reviews, or estate sale negotiations. I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't tell if I was shocked or overwhelmed by the significance of that sentence. Callista sprang up so quickly that her chair squeaked backwards and said, "This is a joke. Mom did not desire that. Like a razor, she turned on me. Didn't you put it in her mind?" As I handled everything, I played the martyr and made all those late-night calls complaining about being left out. Callista Aunt Dolores made an attempt but was cut off right away. She said, No, they must hear this," pointing to the few family acquaintances and distant relatives who were hanging around the back. For years, she didn't even come. Then all of a sudden, like Florence Nightingale, she was by her mother's bedside rewriting history when she fell ill. I maintained eye contact with the tablecloth. I tried not to tense up in embarrassment, but for what reason I could feel every muscle in my back. She forced this on her. In the dark, I spoke to her. At the funeral, she did not even shed a tear. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I knew she would turn even one tear into evidence. I didn't flinch. Mr. Whitlow interrupted, saying, "Miss Marin, your mother wrote these terms in her own hand. In front of 2 impartial witnesses and a notary, the will was signed." She didn't understand. Callista lost her temper. She had begun to muddle things. "Dolores, you said so yourself." She was exhausted, I remarked. Without a moment's confusion, my aunt whispered. Nobody spoke. The floor was covered with gentle shadows as the sunshine poured through the huge windows. In a room filled with blades, it was ironic how delicate everything appeared. Did she leave anything else behind? I asked quietly. I had the impression that my voice was coming from outside of myself. After a moment of hesitation, Mr. Whitlow produced a sealed envelope from his bag. "She did, Audalon. She left this for you." I grabbed it by both hands. There was more than just paper in the thick envelope. Something heavy, almost sacred, was inside it. I flipped it over and found one folded paper with the seal broken. At the top was my name. The blue ink faintly faded and her handwriting. My mother's signature loops and slants extended across the page. It began slowly. She apologized politely, but in a few sentences she said something that caused the room to disappear from my memory. Something that changed all of my memories of her. It wasn't until the rustle of paper drew me back that I realized I was holding my breath. The letter was weighty than sadness, yet lightest than air. I opened it cautiously and gently, as though the truth within may vanish. If I went too quickly, I hadn't seen my mother's handwriting curl over the paper since before the tremors started. It appeared angry and frail at the same time. I read it out loud, even though I hadn't planned to. When I said the second line to Odilon, my voice broke. When no one else arrived, you did. When I was unable to talk, you prepared me soup. When your sister filed the power of attorney documents without notifying me, you remained. The only person who didn't beg me to sell the house so you could live there is you. Nobody spoke up. Not quite yet. It appeared like the old grandfather clock in the corner was still chiming. I continued. Like a whisper. The ink shivered. I didn't write this because I was puzzled. I wasn't perplexed, but I was exhausted. I also want you to know that after she attempted to sell the house under my feet, I amended the will. The idea of being hidden away while strangers passed through our hallways was too much for me to bear. The sunroom felt abruptly cooler as I looked up. Like a monument fashioned out of bitterness, Callista stood, clearly regretting wearing a tie. One of our cousins moved in his chair. I could feel the weight of every eye moving toward her because the room had moved just enough. I took no action. Finally, she stated that she didn't want to. Her voice sounded scratchy and strained. She was ill. Delicious. In a hospice bed. Do you believe she could make such a choice? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Rather, I took the letter and redirected it in Mr. Whitlow's direction. Could you verify when this was signed? He leaned in and adjusted his spectacles. We had 2 employees that saw it. The hospice nurse reported complete cognitive clarity the same day. I've got the paperwork. Callisto's face quickly lost its color. Did you push her? Silently, I said. To state, not to accuse. While she was recuperating from pneumonia, you spoke with a realtor. An octave was added to Callisto's voice. In the end, you have no notion what she was like. She felt afraid. Odilon. You gave her what she wanted to hear, so she clung to your voice. Aunt Dolores took over, calm but firm. Don't any way you choose, you can spin it. But I was able to see her for myself. In those last days, your mother was more like herself than she had been in years. How about you, nothing? I could have said would have affected her as much as the fact that you attempted to remove her from her life. Stung. Callista took a step back. No one moved, so she searched about for assistance. Even her spouse avoided looking at the reality directly, keeping his gaze fixed on the carpet with the letter folded in my hands like a pressed flower. I turned slowly and made my way toward the front window of the parlor, something that is intended to endure beyond its initial form. I said very little. She didn't want to be sold like a piece of real estate, though I respected that. Then the quiet descended. However, it wasn't the quiet I had known as a child, the one that meant disgrace. Once I had to hide in corners at family gatherings because of that, or act as though you didn't hear my name being omitted. Plans. This was not like the others. Here's for the first time. I got no response from anybody. It wasn't shame, though. Fear was the cause. We went from the sunroom to the estate club's garden lounge where lunch was prepared, as if nothing had just broken a family's back. Lined silver trays with finger sandwiches, pitchers of mimosas perspired on the linen, and someone dared to play jazz music as if it would ease the pain of what had just transpired. I sipped black coffee from a fragile porcelain cup that I couldn't recall ever possessing while I sat near the distant window. Callista was drifting from table to table across the room. She was beaming and giggling as if she hadn't just been publicly deprived of her authority. The elder people were uncomfortably near to her as she leaned in, putting a hand on their shoulders and giving them grave nods when appropriate. Control of damage. Her gift was that I didn't want to perform, though. I still had the letter folded on my lap. My hand's heat has now warmed the wrinkles. Beside me sat Aunt Dolores. Keep quiet. Be mindful. A couple of relatives walked by with uncomfortable looks. A few gave a nod. Others only gazed. However, I saw something in their eyes that I had never seen before. Recognition. The sound of Callista's voice cut through the commotion. It's too noisy to be informal. Oh, Dylan and his mother have always had a special bond. She turned to face 3 family friends who had known us since we were little. She had a knack for playing the victim. Really? I only wish she hadn't taken advantage of Mom when she was most vulnerable. A slow, disillusioned sigh came from one of the women. A friend of my mother's who used to braid my hair on Sunday mornings. Not exactly under her breath, she said. That's low. At that moment, Dolores got to her feet without yelling. She just collected her handbag, looked at me, and left the French doors without a word. I put the coffee cup back on the saucer after taking a leisurely drink. I wasn't being passive while I was quiet. It was fuel. I got to my feet, slicing through the air like glass without raising my voice. "Callista," I said emphatically. I never had to control anyone, and I can verify it with every document. The room froze with a polished grin that cracked just enough to reveal the terror underneath. Callista turned to face me. "Please pardon me." I retained the documents I stated as I folded my arms and signed documents, emails, and timestamps. Even the voicemail my mother left me when you secretly filed the power of attorney. The silence was like a curtain falling in the middle of the season. "You wish to tell that untruth in public?" "Stone steady," I asked. "I will then reveal the truth to the public." Everything. In the corner, there was a cough. Another visitor shuffled uncomfortably. Subtly, people started to turn their seats toward me. Callista gave a sharp blink. Now her voice was harsher. "You wouldn't." I gave her a direct look. "You're wrong. Hold off for a week. Your whole life." She didn't answer. She was unable to. Now I was being heard by the audience she believed she had, and I didn't have to raise my voice for once. I didn't have to be shady or have a tantrum. All I needed to do was express what I ought to have said 20 years ago in a clear and concise manner. "I can no longer be shamed into quiet by you." I didn't hold off till she responded. I took my coffee, went back to my chair, and let the room take care of the rest, but I caught a glimpse of it on her face as I looked up one more time. Not shame, not melancholy. Fear. As if she had finally come to terms with the fact that I would no longer be her punching bag. Callista's smile had cracked by the conclusion of the breakfast. Whatever broke that day, though, didn't stop her. It increased her risk, if anything. I discovered a manila envelope stuck uncomfortably in my mailbox a week later. On the front, my name was typed. Distant and frigid inside, a summons from the court. She had submitted a move to challenge the will, alleging that I had forced a dying lady to change her estate, and that our mother had been under emotional pressure. She relied on the legal concept of undue influence. I repeated the lines as I stood in my front hallway. Although the legalese was elegantly clothed, the meaning was obvious. I was being accused of lying by her. Turning the latch behind me, I entered my home office and grabbed the bottom drawer of the antique oak filing cabinet. Mom assisted me with my graduate school refinish. It became stuck. Perhaps a bit of dampness, but I opened it and got everything I needed. The red folder with the addition of my mother's handwriting on it. Third addendum. Notarized paperwork she had signed during her final month in hospice were within. The will has a comprehensive addendum dated subsequent to her first alterations. She made it clear that Callista had taken action to take charge of her money while she was ill with pneumonia. Copies of bank statements that Callista never imagined anybody would see again were even included, along with a letter to her estate lawyer. There were withdrawals for jewelry spa treatments and a down payment on a new automobile that wasn't listed as a gift. I suspected that Mom's log had been accessed, so I took the printed emails and sent copies to her. "Don't remove these Audilon." I recall the message clearly. "In case I subsequently forget, I knew you'll know." And I was done allowing someone who only appeared when there was anything to gain to rewrite her memory. By midday, I was speaking with the legal clinic I had previously attended over the phone. "Do you have supporting documentation?" The woman on the other end of the telephone asked me back when I was assisting a friend in a conservatorship struggle. "I have more than that. I have her voice." I said I wore a blue blouse and ironed beige pants when I entered the county courthouse 3 days later. Simply said, "It's nice, tidy, and firmly rooted." Even though the weight in my backpack felt heavier than ever, I maintained a neutral demeanor because of what it all stood for, not because of what I was carrying. Callista was on the courtroom steps as I passed her. After giving me a thorough examination, she muttered to her lawyer as if I were a bother. She wanted to brush it off. At the reception desk inside, I gave the cashier the red folder. She opened it, looked at it for a moment, then stopped. She knitted her brow. "Is this the handwriting of the deceased?" "Indeed, observed, signed. Notarized." She turned a couple more pages. A tone fell from her voice. She whispered, "You might want to sit down for this one." "But not to me." Her coworker's eyes widened as she turned to face him. "I didn't sit. I just stood aside and steadily signed the counter motion papers. I was sitting in my home office that evening when light spilled across the hardwood, softly illuminating the scuffed edges of old files. I took a look around and let my breath out. At last. Money was no longer the issue. Callista's attempt to paint over history was the subject of this. She wanted to pretend I hadn't spent nights in a chair next to her bed while the oxygen machine hissed next to us, and to forget the months I spent feeding Mom soup when she was hardly able to raise a spoon. Remove the sentence where I respected Mom's request not to be relocated, not to be controlled. She's not only attempting to make me seem bad, to no one. I spoke out loud. She wants to get rid of me. The problem with quiet, though, is this. Allow it to sharpen as you allow it to build. Allow it to maintain its form. Shouting is never as effective as this. And I wasn't hiding this time. She incited a paper war she didn't remember. I was aware of the original's burial place. When I left the home that morning, the sun hadn't risen all the way. However, the air was already thick, as if it anticipated a storm. Instead of being thrown into the mayhem, I knew was coming. I parked a block from the courtroom, preferring the peace and quiet. I saw boom, microphones, tripods, individuals with press-readable tags attached to their jackets. And in the center of it all, as I got closer to the square, Callista. My sister was already in the middle of her act. When she wanted to appear approachable, she donned that lovely purple cloak. Her voice was shaking in all the appropriate places, yet her makeup was flawless. She told a reporter, "I only ever tried to protect our mother." There was a little tremble in her bottom lip, but cash? People are changed by money. With a sympathetic nod, the reporter made a note on a pad. "We are aware that your sister will be here soon, Callista." For a brief period, his face changed. A moment of precise control. She certainly has her version. I stopped just out of frame, far enough away to be invisible, yet close enough to hear every word. That was her move then. Before I could say a word, shape the tale. She portrays herself as the distraught daughter who has been deceived by her avaricious sister. Erase the proof I held with the cameras. But I was ready. I took a step forward. There's a gentle click of heels on the concrete. I wasn't wearing sympathy clothes. Just the truth. Hair pushed back, flat shoes, and a charcoal suit. Just the facts. No nonsense. As I walked up to the lead journalist, a lady in her 40s with keen eyes and a coffee spill on her sleeve, the audience became silent and turned to face me. She said, "Miss Marin, do you want to reply to what your sister said?" I didn't respond right away, rather. I extracted a sealed envelope from my tote bag. Without saying anything, I gave it to her. She opened it to see a folder that included a notarized letter from the hospice nurse 2 months before to our mother's death. Time-stamped screenshots and email threads demonstrating Callista wire transactions from our mother's joint account. It was written by the nurse. The patient frequently voiced worries about her daughter Callista gaining unauthorized access to financial data. Logged on file is the recommended independent supervision. As she looked over the page, the journalist's lips twitched in silence. Then she raised her head. "Where did you acquire this, ma'am?" "I got it from my mom," I answered. She was aware that this day may arrive before the reporter could react. Out of the crowd came a voice I can attest to that everybody turned, wearing her previous badge around her neck. Nurse Jeanette stood close to the rear. Her night shift nurse was me. Miss Callista yelled and brandished a checkbook at her mother as I submitted a report. She was recuperating from pneumonia. That night she sobbed herself to sleep. Across the plaza, murmurs floated. One man stepped back from Callista warily. Disgustingly, another woman mumbled and shook her head. Callista lost her composure. She said, "This is a smear campaign. This does not establish manipulation." She was dying. She was unsure about her actions. I looked directly at her, but I didn't raise my voice. She was well aware of her actions. After you attempted to transfer her to a care facility, she altered her will. She never consented. You wanted the home demolished and converted into opulent condominiums. Even when the architect was sleeping, you gave her a tour of the backyard. Callisto opened and closed his lips, but nothing came out. I took a step closer to complete what had begun, not to threaten. I said, "I'm not here to destroy you. I finished acting. I'm done playing the silent one while you change the course of history in the middle of the day." The cameras swiveled in my direction. I didn't recoil. I refrained from grinning. I simply stood there holding the truth behind me. A storm. Again there was silence. It wasn't mine, though. This time she owned it. Despite my steady gait, my heart wasn't at rest as I entered the courtroom. It was laser-sharp and concentrated. No formality or notification of a bailiff was made. The rows were already crowded. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to, my extended relatives in a long time, mom's old church buddies, and the media. They were also present. From Callista's vibrant jacket to my subdued gray dress, I swept. There was no hearing here. It was a theater. My sister had positioned herself as the main character. She was only a few feet away from the bench with a folder in one hand. I was previously aware of its contents. During a feverish recuperation, she had forced her mother to sign the older will. Everyone stood up when the judge walked in. Then the air was cut by the tone. Our purpose is to complete the probate of the late Maeve Marin's estate. Both sides will present their evidence to us. You can start, Miss Callista Marin. Callista's throat cleared. This is my mother's officially acknowledged will, Your Honor. Notarized, witnessed, and signed. Copies have been sent to opposing counsel and the court. I didn't interrupt. Not quite yet. In that sickly sweet tone she often employed while pretending to be innocent, she went on. It designates me as the estate's only executor and heir, which I accepted out of duty rather than greed. During Mom's last year, my sister Odalyn did not assist with her care. She didn't show up until the paperwork was finished. I fear my mother was coerced, perhaps even tricked. The courtroom was a hive. Some reporters began to scribble. The judge looked at me. Marion and Miss Odell, would you want to answer? I got to my feet silently, and without fanfare I moved forward with one envelope in each hand. Indeed, Your Honor. My mother has signed, dated, and notarized my subsequent will a month after my sister's version was shown. The room fell silent. With a raised eyebrow, the judge motioned for the bailiff. My mother's handwriting ran around the flap of the pale blue envelope I gave over. Known unquestionably hers soft, the judge gently cut the top. He glanced. He gave a nod. This paper seems to be legitimate under the law. Date 9 July, 4 weeks have passed since the last will. Dolores Marion and Jeanette Holloway, who were notarized by state-certified notary Erica Plath, were named as witnesses. Calm broke. She stepped forward. She made it up. It's a fake. I didn't recoil. I just turned to face the AV technician in the courtroom's corner. Would you kindly play the file? The screen wavered. The judge nodded slightly. There she was. My mother was thinner than I recalled, but she had a serene look in her eyes that made the place quiet. Softly. If this is ever played, it indicates that Callista has attempted to mislead me once more. She attempted to place me in assisted living against my wishes, so I created a new will. She took out more than $8,000 without my consent after speaking with a realtor behind my back. I wasn't pressured by Odalyn. She kept me safe. Everything is now hers because of this. It's what I wanted too. Clearly, openly, and to the fullest extent possible. The quiet was broken by a cough. Callista was stuck in mid-step. Her mouth wide, her eyes fixed on the screen as if it had betrayed her as I turned around. The judge's voice was forceful. Testamentary aim is confirmed by this. The July 9th. Will be accepted as the operational document by me, unless there is unquestionable proof of fraud, which I don't see from this video. And notary documents. Callista's voice raised. She was dying? No one looked at her, but she had no idea what she was saying. Not even the reporters. The judge looked at me. What else would you want to submit? I gave a headshake. Just that I respected my mother's decisions and loved her. Aunt Dolores nodded slightly in the front row. A non-verbal affirmation. And I didn't grin as the gavel dropped. I refrained from crying. I simply stood erect. Permit her to scream. Allow her to conceal the reality. No need to yell any longer. The sun had moved to the west by the time we left the courthouse, casting a gentle gold glow across the stone stairs. I could tell Callista wasn't walking next to me without turning. She had remained. She huddled in the corner as if her own lies had finally caught up with her. This time she didn't shout. She didn't give me a glance, nothing but quiet, not the type I'd known as a child, the one who made me desire for recognition. No. I had earned this solitude final like the end of a page. The cameras flashed. My name was yelled out by reporters. Odalyn. Are you going to comment? Did you think the video would be shown in court? How long has the second will been with you? I continued. I gave them my weather face as my mother would have said. The one I used for Sunday meals, funerals, and storms, when Callista said something sarcastic again. Romy was waiting at the curb in her ancient Toyota when I descended the stairs. She already had her hand on the passenger door. At first, she remained silent, only glanced at me before turning to face the courthouse. Then, it's back at me, as if she was gauging my level of well-being or whether I was only surviving by habit. Are you prepared? At last she inquired. No, I said, but I'm finished. It was a calm journey home, only the occasional pounding of my heartbeat in my throat and the subtle buzz of tires on pavement. It was getting late as we parked into my driveway. Everything seems a little softer, but it feels more honest at that transitional hour. When I went outside, I smelled the rich oak dry grass and the tiniest hint of the jasmine my mother had placed inside years before Romy trailed me to the porch before coming to a halt beside the screen door. My breath caught when she took out a letter with edges that were singed from her purse. Known I discovered it concealed under your mother's old wallet's lining. She said, it didn't appear to be something you wanted random people looking through. I handled it lightly. Even though the paper was fragile and wrinkled, her handwriting and ink were still visible. The envelope was simply addressed to my silent warrior, my youngest child. I took a while to read it. First, I took a seat on the swing. In the distance, let the cicadas buzz, let the silence fall. I then opened it. You were the strongest at all times. Even if they didn't pretend to see, I'm hoping you'll realize one day, it didn't matter if they praised you. There's some truths are not expressed, you lived and you did it well. Mom, you have my undying love. It wasn't really impressive, it was not lyrical. However, I never heard her say it out, but it was everything. And it arrived at the precise moment I needed it, after I had given up seeking approval, just tranquility. Romy produced 2 teacups. We didn't make toast. There were no speeches from us. As the sun set below the treetops and the porch light blinked on as if it sensed that silence was needed, she simply sat next to me. I glanced around at the banisters peeling paint. Callista would frequently complain that the flower container was too tiny. Town. Instead of ringing, the wind chimes clinked as if they were conversing, and I reflected on all the birthdays I've missed because I was waiting for someone. Every report card, the hospital visits for waiting alone on Christmas mornings. However, I no longer felt empty. I was satisfied. In a calm, steady manner because I was no longer living for their approval. A place at a table that was never intended for me was not something I was attempting to win with a companion at my side. And this letter in my lap, I had established my own place on this porch in this house. Callista may never say sorry. Perhaps I would be the one to break the stillness while the family continued to discuss what had transpired in whispers. However, lives had been spared long enough by that quiet. Not all wounds must be loud in order to be remembered. Applause isn't necessary for certain triumphs to be genuine.